see singing faces and smiling faces as we are able to worship the Lord, as we're able to do that in freedom. And I know that for us, we just take that for granted, the freedom that we have to worship God. If you've ever gone to a place, I'll never forget taking a mission trip to Amsterdam, and the missionaries there telling us, don't say Jesus yet. Don't say Jesus till we tell you to say Jesus. For the first 3 or 4 days of that trip, we did nothing but go out to parks and subways and all those places and pray. That's a hard mission trip. The hardest mission trip you'll ever go on is one where they tell you to pray for 4 days before you ever mention the name of Jesus. So on the 4th day, we were able to say Jesus. They said, here's what we want to do. You've been going to these parks all week. You've had all these kids come out. They want to see the Americans, right? We're sort of like the token whatever, and we're playing ping pong with them, and we're throwing frisbee and playing football. And they said, you've had these kids coming all week. Now here's the story we want you to tell. And it's a gospel message, a very simple gospel message that they want you to tell. And then they said, but you can't have an altar call. You can't say, all of you bow your head and close your eyes. And they said at the very end of this story we want you to share, you just say, if you have any more questions, just come see one of us. So we built up. Sunday we walked around and prayed. Monday we walked around and prayed. Tuesday, we were playing in the parks and praying. And then Thursday was the day. And so on that Thursday we did share the gospel just like they told us to. Out of all of the kids that were there was one kid who sort of trickled over to the side, talked to one of our teenagers that was with our group, and wanted to know about Christ. And there in that park, in the middle of Amsterdam, among all sorts of things in Amsterdam, this kid accepted Christ. So we just leave, man. We're going home. We are pumped. We are excited. We are just boom through the roof. And we get back with the rest of our teams because there's been pockets of these people everywhere. And we get back there and they all start telling their story. And out of 110 people on this mission team, spread all around the whole place of Amsterdam, all of us building up all week, and on Thursday sharing the gospel, we got the report. There was 5 people who accepted Christ. See, some people live in places where they don't say Jesus. Some people live in places where this is foreign. And not only foreign, there's places where it's forbidden, even. The next day we go back to the park, our last day, and sure enough, we have one kid, and they've told us, here's how you follow up with that kid, and you give him, And we get to the park, and the park is surrounded by parents. Staring at us. I don't know if I've ever walked into a more intimidating situation at that moment. Then when we come around the corner, because you get off the subway and you walk, a couple blocks to get to we come around the corner and we see the little park area literally surrounded by the parents of all of these kids that we had played with all week and built relationships with. They were all there because they heard about what we said the day before. And they watched us that whole day. You see, if you've ever been in that kind of environment, and then you get to this kind of environment, it's like, woo, doggy, let's go. But sometimes we just take it for granted, the privilege that we have to worship in freedom, to sing, to carry these, to read it out loud. We just miss a lot of that. So I'm thrilled today for the worship that we've been able to share in. That has nothing to do with the message today. I'm so sorry. That's just 3 minutes I had to share from my heart there for a second. But we are doing this series on the family. And I had in my notes last week this sort of disclaimer. And somehow I skipped over it last week. So this week I put it very first thing in my notes. I made it highlighted in red so that I wouldn't forget it. Because I want you to understand as we do this series on the family that I'm not one of those people that are like, well, I wouldn't change anything. I'm one of those, I'm literally, if I could go back 20 years, there is so many things I would change. And the reality is I didn't realize even some of the mistakes I was making 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 5 days ago, until I got older, a little wiser, saw things from a different perspective sometimes. So I want you to know that when we're talking about the family, and I say that I'm preaching to all of us, I am preaching to all of us. I feel like that I am on this boat with you guys as we look into the family, as we look into God's design for the family. Last week we started talking about that we need to begin looking at our families from God's perspective and not the world's perspective. And it's so easy for us to get sucked up into the world's perspective of our family, and then we begin to try to make our family fit into that world's perspective. And when we do that, we miss God's perspective. I'll give you a great example. This week, all throughout Houston County, all throughout our country, it has already begun. But there's going to be valedictorian speeches, salutatorian speeches, and those kids who earn those degrees and earn those privileges and those honors have worked really hard to get where they're at. They have studied. They have taken classes that are harder than the norm. They have done a lot of things to get to that level of getting the title of a salutatorian or a valedictorian. And I have no doubt that the parents of those people, when they get up to give their speech, is going to be grinning from ear to ear. The family is going to be beaming because my kid is the valedictorian of their school. 500 graduates, 300 graduates, and my kid was ranked number 1. All the while, God may very well be in heaven looking down and weeping at the very same time. Why? Because this valedictorian may have a free ride to Harvard, and that may last him a lifetime. But his eternity may still be in jeopardy. You see, we have to begin to look at our families from God's perspective. We have to begin to ask ourselves questions of what would please God instead of what would please my neighbor or my friends or the social circles that I run in. What would please my God versus what would please those around us, those that my kids play sports with, those that my kids are around. We need to begin to look and focus in on God's design for our families, regardless of what your family unit looks like. All around this room, we all have different looking family units. And what we're looking at are universal principles that God gives us for how to operate and live within our families. Before this series is over, we're going to look at our finances because that's a big part of our families. Before this series is over, we're going to be looking at different things. But what we're really looking at are universal principles that God's designed to help us all with our families. So today we're going to continue on that journey. Today we're going to talk about being a perfect parent. Being a perfect parent. Now I know you're all very interested in that. And in fact, I know that some of you kids are interested in that as well. So today I want to talk about being a perfect parent. And what I did was I sort of came up with 26 characteristics of the perfect parent. And so I want to just read them, but I want you to sort of hang with me as I read them. Don't give up on me halfway through, okay? So I want to go through these characteristics of the perfect parent. The first one is they're a precise accountant. The perfect parent is a precise accountant. Not only that, they're perfectly balanced. Perfectly balanced. Not only that, the perfect parent cares for scrapes and bruises. They're the perfect disciplinarian. They always make the right call. They're an encourager. They always put family first. The perfect parent is godly 100% of the time. The perfect parent always has helping hands. The perfect parent is involved in their children's life. Just the right amount, not too much. Don't want a helicopter crash. The perfect parent is joyous all the time. The perfect parent always has kind words. The perfect parent loves. They love kids and pets and dirty laundry and supper dishes and making school lunches and getting up early and staying up late. The perfect parent maximizes every day. The perfect parent notices when things aren't right. The perfect parent opens. They open jars, bottles, cans, doors, drawers. You get it? The perfect parent is a prayer warrior. The perfect parent is inquisitive. They always ask the right question. The perfect parent is always right around the corner. The perfect parent is successful every time. The perfect parent is trained. They have a GED, a BS, a MD, and a PhD in matters of the heart, of life, and of success. The perfect parent has unconditional love at all times. The perfect parent is always vivacious, spirit fingers, right? They're always excited. The perfect parent is wise beyond their years. The perfect parent is an excellent cook. The perfect parent yields to the Holy Spirit at all times. And the perfect parent is zany. Give me a break. I had to come up with something for Z. Zany. Now, I think we can all agree this morning that none of us who are parents, have been parents, or will one day be parents are perfect. None of us meet those 26 characteristics all the time. Some not. In fact, let's just be honest. Some of you got excited when I did zany because you're like, I got one. So here's what I want to do. I want you to look to the person on your right, and I want you to tell them, you're off the hook. Right now. Now look to the person on your left and tell them, you're off the hook. I want us to understand today that we're off the hook because none of us are perfect parents. None of us are perfect parents. But what I want to do today is look at the responsibility that we have as parents. And at the very end, I want to wrap it up with giving us some guidance about being a parent. Again, not a perfect parent, but of being a godly parent. The first thing I want you to notice, if you have your bulletin and you take notes, is that children are a blessing from God. Children are a blessing from God. Psalm 127 says, verse 3, children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from Him. Children born to a young man are like arrows in a warrior's hands. How joyful is the man whose quiver is full of them. He will not be put to shame when he confronts his accusers at the city gates. Carved out by God's hands, molded into God's image, giving to a mind, a soul, and a body, and then entrusted to you. Why? I have no idea. Because we've already established that none of us are perfect. We've already established we all make mistakes. We all established if you're an old enough parent, you've already looked back and said, I messed up on that. I blew that. I should have done that better. So why would God entrust us with these folks? Why would God entrust us with these little angels, these quivers, so to speak, of arrows in our quivers? He will bless our young people, our children, with a mind so that we can help them understand who God the Father is. He's going to bless them with a heart so that we can help guide them, to teach them to trust who Jesus Christ is. He's going to give them a body that will grow and will change and develop, all to teach us about the Creator God who has created them in their image. A poet, Carl Sandburg, said a baby is God's opinion that the world should go on. The baby is God's opinion that the world should go on. Matthew 18 says this. It says, beware that you do not look down on any of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven, their angels are always in the presence of my heavenly Father. You see, God has a priority of heart for our children. And they are a blessing from Him, a blessing to us. The second thing I want you to realize is that children are a responsibility and they are our responsibility. Psalm 22 says, direct your children or train up your children onto the right path. And when they're older, they will not leave it. As a parent, or I even have in my notes here, an influential adult like a coach or a teacher or a pastor, we have the responsibility to direct our children, to teach them and to tell them, to show them what the right path is. And sometimes we can show them that through our successes. We can say, look, follow me, follow what I did. But can I tell you, sometimes we can teach them through our failures as well. But as a parent, you have to be willing and given to humbling yourselves before your children. To be able to say to them, I blew it, I messed up, I didn't handle that situation the right way. Pastor Chuck Swindoll says, each day of our lives we make deposits in the memory banks of our children. And I would add to his quote, I would say that we never know when those deposits will bear dividends. Every day as we raise our children through what we say and more importantly what we do and how we act, do we teach them lessons of who God is. In Deuteronomy, God is speaking to the people of Israel, and he's sort of going back and he's saying, remember this and remember this. And he talks about Pharaoh, and he talks about when they were in captivity. He talks about their escape when Pharaoh let them go. He talks about when they got to the sea and how they were scared to cross, and they crossed and were safe. And he's recounting all of this stuff to them. And in Deuteronomy 11, he says this, he says, to commit yourself wholeheartedly to these words of mine. So much so, he goes on to say, tie them to your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Then he says in verse 19, teach them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, so that as long as the sky remains above the earth, you and your children may flourish in the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors. You see, they are our responsibility. They are our responsibility. A homeschool mom, Angela Schmidt, said, while we try to teach our children all about life, our children teach us what life is all about. And so there are no perfect parents in the room today, but there are parents in the room today, even if your kids are grown and gone, that we need to realize that our children are a blessing from God, and we do need to realize that we have a responsibility to them. James 1:27 even exposes us to something else. It says, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God. Now, I don't know about you, but in my life, what I want to have is pure and genuine religion in the sight of God. It means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. Caring for orphans. I wonder if we realize that we even have a responsibility to those children who don't have parents. Organizations like Compassion International and those kinds of organizations have list upon list upon list upon list of children who have no parents. Many of them live in places where their parents have been killed through war. Many of them live in places where their parents have died because of disease. And literally they are orphans. And we even have a responsibility under God to care for the orphans, to be involved in that process, so to speak. The third point I want to make is that children are our future. They are. The older I get, the more I realize I will not be here forever. And children are our future. In 1981, the government was doing a study on children's health. Right? I mean, they wanted to check out children. They interviewed them. They followed them. They literally followed them as they got older. And here this is what our government came. This is what we paid millions of dollars for our government to come up with. This statement, pretty genius. Children are 1/3 of our population and all of our future. They're our future. We actually live in the generation of those children who were studied in that study. Those children that were studied then are now my age, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, mid-40s, mid-50s. Those people now have kids and grandkids. The people that they studied and that they looked at, and I'm not sure what the study concluded at the very end, but you know what? They were exactly right. They were 1/3 of our population and all of our future. Lady Bird Johnson, the former First Lady of the United States, she said, children are likely to live up to what you believe of them. They're very likely to live up to what you believe of them. The psalmist in Psalm 22 says, our children will also serve him. Future generations will hear about the wonders of the Lord. His righteous acts will be told to those not yet born. They will hear about everything he has done. Children are our future. And I know sometimes it's hard to believe, especially the younger they are, to think that one day they're going to be the leaders. One day they're going. I want you to watch Facebook this evening, because I'm going to post a cool video that was taken this morning at church. It was our worship leader and his young son and daughter singing with him. Folks, they are the future worship leaders. They are the future preachers. Your children are the future missionaries. Your children are the future teachers. Your children are the future parents. And so I want to give you today I call them the 3 U's of parenting. The 3 U's. And I want you to write these down because, folks, can I tell you, these fall directly on our lap. By that I mean there's no excuse you can use to try to get out of them. You can't say, well, but my kid... That doesn't fly. Well, if they would just, that doesn't matter. These 3 U's fall directly on the laps of us as parents. The first U is unconditional love. Unconditional love. And I know it's hard. I'm looking at this side that has so many young kids. I know it's hard to look at those perfect little angels and how cute they are and just think that they would ever disappoint you or ever let you down or ever say no to you. Or I just know you can't even imagine that would happen from those perfect little angels. But I'm here to tell you, your children at times will disappoint you. Sometimes accidentally, but sometimes on purpose. They just will. There's a reason that they call them the terrible twos. There's a reason that parents of middle schoolers groan all the time. Have you ever noticed that? You be talking to the parent of a middle schooler and go, oh, they just sigh a lot. They groan a lot. I mean, you go through high school and you make it through all sorts of transitions. Your body changes, your social circle changes, your academics change, just everything changing in high school. You pray and pray and pray as they exit high school to whatever they're going to do into adulthood. But the one thing, parent, that you can always do is show unconditional love. Unconditional love. The next thing you can do is have unending prayer. Unending prayer. We have the privilege of living in a country where we can pray anywhere, anytime, any way we want to, for anything that we want to. We must be praying for our children. We live in a world today that is so much different than the world that we grew up in. How many times do you hear that? The world today is so much different than the world. And guess what? The world that your children will grow up in today will be so much different than the world today. Your children, especially those of you that have very young children, you need to realize that the world that your child is going to live in is going to be over-sexualized, more materialistic than ever, and less Christian than ever before. You must be praying for your children. And can I say this? You need to be praying for your children before you need to be praying for your children. You know what I'm saying? Before the police officer knocks on, that's not when you start praying for your children. Before the boss calls or before you hear about this or that, you need to be praying for them now, because they are going to grow up in a world that is so much different, and not necessarily in a good way. Yeah, I'm sure our technology will be leaps and the technology they have will be leaps and bounds. I'm sure their cars are going to be hovercrafts and they're going to look like the Jetsons. I'm sure all that's going to play out and all that's going to be true. But folks, I'm telling you, the world that your children are going to grow up in are going to be so much different than the world even you grew up in. And we need to be praying for our children. So we have unconditional love. We have unending prayer. And then the third U is unnatural grace. Unnatural grace. And I have to call it unnatural grace because, quite honestly, it's supernatural grace. It is a grace that we have for our children. Now, I'm going to tell you one mistake that parents make is that we show our children grace all the time, but we never teach them what grace is. There are some parents that on the side of discipline, I'm going to show grace this time. I know they said no to me. I'm just going to show some grace this time. Well, folks, when you show grace, you need to be teaching your children what grace is. Because grace is in the absence of what you should be getting. You're getting this. I'm giving you something you do not deserve. I'm blessing you in a way you do not deserve. I'm letting you sit on your tail where I should be tearing it up from that attitude. But it's a supernatural grace that God shows us. I have that here in my notes. If you just think about everything that takes place in the life of one of our children, you think about the DNA that has been built into them and factored into their body, how God has created them so intricately. And sometimes we look at them and we compare them to ourselves. Well, they look like him or they look like her or they act like him or her, looking at the parents. We need to realize they've been created by God individually and special with their own purpose, their own calling, their own privilege in the sight of God. And as a parent, you need God at work in the life of your children. And one of the ways that can happen is if you're able to show them supernatural grace. A grace that literally can come only from God. Remember the question we started off last week with? Are you spending your life on things that will last a lifetime or things that will last an eternity? And as parents, many times our failing is we spend our time on things that will last a lifetime. We spend our money on things for our kids that will last a lifetime. And what's going to happen to many of us is we'll get to the end of our lives and realize that we've not invested in the eternity of our children instead of the lifetime of our children. I want to address something that's happening in our society today. I told Monica I'm getting ready to use some pastor credits. She said, "What's a pastor credit?" I said, "That's when you build up enough trust with your people that you say something you know is going to make them mad, and you just trust that they're going to like you afterwards." So I'm getting ready to use some pastor credits, and I'm going to preface it by saying some of you will turn on your side. Some of you are going to leave here maybe even mad at me. Just ask yourself if what I'm telling you is the truth. There's a trend in our society. It started about 15 years ago, 10 years ago, really hard. Really started about 20 years ago, 15, but 10 years ago, it really started really hard. And that was this. When I grew up in the church, I was there from 9 to 12 on Sunday morning. And then I was back there from 5 to 8 on Sunday night. And then I was there on Monday night for visitation. Tuesday night we had some sort of meeting. Wednesday night we were there from 5 to 8. Thursday night, once a month, we had brotherhood or men's meeting, that kind of thing. And we literally could be at the church every night of the week. And the church began to say, I've been in church meetings as a staff member. I've been in denominational meetings. And the church began to say, our people are so busy. And so the church began to back off of some of those nights and some of those times. In fact, to the point where a lot of churches, most churches will say, all we want is Sunday morning. That's the church I grew up in, and many of you grew up in that kind of thing. And so the church backed off of Sunday night. So like, hey, just come Sunday morning. Don't worry about Sunday night. Do your family thing. The church backed off of visitation on Monday. The church backed off of Wednesday nights. I mean, the church has sort of backed off of a lot of that stuff. And it is true. You guys are busy. Our families are busy today. I told one of our families that I said, I don't see how you do it. I don't see how you do it financially. I don't see how you do it energy-wise. I don't see how you just do it. But they do. They're busy. And they're gone all the time, everywhere, all over the place. But here's what's beginning to happen. Now there are coaches, teams, and tournaments saying, we want your Sunday mornings. See how quiet it got? You hear it ching ching? Pastor credits are just raking off right about now. Coaches, teams, and tournaments have begun to tell parents, we want your Sunday mornings. And the sad thing is, I have not heard of a single team or a single tournament canceling because the Christian parents stood up and said no. And those of you that have really young kids, just know it will be so much worse when your kid gets to that level than it even is today. That's why Joshua said he had to decide for him and his house, right? When we do baby dedication, we do it and we read that verse. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You guys, as parents, we have to decide. As young parents, you have to decide long before you ever get there, long before that coach ever calls and said, we sure would love to have your 4-year-old play on our travel soccer team. You have to decide what you're willing to give up. The good news today is Billy Graham agrees with me. So you can get mad at me if you want to, but you can't be mad at Billy Graham. That's not biblical. Because here's what Billy Graham said. The greatest legacy one can pass on to one's children and grandchildren is not money or other material things accumulated in one's life, but rather a legacy of character and faith. So will you ever be the perfect parent? No. Let yourself off the hook. Be willing to admit when you've made the mistake. Be willing to admit when you've fallen short. Be willing to admit when I didn't handle that situation correctly. Look, we have some funny stories in our family that we tell. Most of them revolve around when Dad didn't do something exactly right. Had to give one of my children a spanking one time. And we had this little paddle thing. Had aerodynamic air holes so it could cut through the wind. I mean, it was meant for speed, but it was not built for durability. And then they deserved a spanking, and they got the spanking. And as I walked out, they said, I hate you. And without even thinking, I just took that paddle and with all I could do and just reached around and whopped them on the leg one more time. Snapped the paddle. And now we sit around the table and we laugh about that because Dad screwed up. Dad lost his head for 30 seconds. I mean, you're not going to be perfect, folks. So let yourself off the hook. But remember, regardless of our children, we can show unconditional love, we can show unending prayer, and we can show a natural grace to our kids. If the purpose of our life is to train them, to send them out, I always tell Austin and Blake, my job is to raise you to be a responsible adult so that one day you're not going to live here. One day you're not going to have to call and get my opinion about things. One day you will be able to make your own decisions and you will live with the blessings of those decisions or the consequences of those decisions. But my job as a parent is to prepare you for out there. And folks, if we do that, what do I want from Austin and Blake when they get out there? I want them to know unconditional love. I want them to know they've been prayed for a ton. And I want them to have experienced unnatural grace. Have I failed? Yeah, there's been times I failed. There'll be times you fail. Some of you are so new to the game, you haven't even realized yet you failed. a day or two, a second, a minute. But the reality is their children have been given to us by God. Why He entrusted me with Austin and Blake, I don't know. But He has. And He's entrusted you guys, and He wants us to live a life in front of them as best that we can that points them to Christ. Because can I tell you, if your kid is valedictorian but is lost and die, they will go to the same hell that every other lost person goes to. If your kid is a star athlete, when they grow up and they get all sorts of publicity in the paper and all sorts of everybody around them at the school campus, they're the big man on campus or big girl on campus, whatever, but their eternity is not set in heaven, and they die, they will go to the same hell every other unsaved, lost athlete goes to. Our key as parents is to do what we can to show our children Christ. And when we blow it, and I did, just so you know, I went back and even apologized when I did that. I was wrong. I lost my head. I said I was sorry. I asked for forgiveness. You want to really freak your kids out? Go to your kid one time and ask for their forgiveness when you blow it. Because parents, just because I said so. Do it because I said so. You really want to throw them for a loop. When you mess up, just go say, I need to apologize. And they will sit down. Like they will literally pass out when you go to apologize to them. But folks, we're teaching them about Christ. We're training them to be an adult, to love Christ, to follow Christ, to trust Christ. We have to be that model in front of them for that. Let's pray.